Over at Marvel Comics, the X-Men are currently facing an incredibly dangerous scenario due to the fact that the X-Men reside out of the nation-state of Krakoa and decide to put one-time foe Mister Sinister on their governing body called the Quiet Council. Little did the X-Men know that Mister Sinister, also known as Nathaniel Essex, was scheming in the background of several pages of X-Men titles to dream up an alternate reality of his own. Thanks to the X-Men's current foe, Moira McTaggart, Mr. Sinister was able to manipulate reality as we know it and cause save points where he could go back to. And if that wasn't enough, that wasn't even the full extent of Mr. Sinister's plans, as he implanted DNA into the X-Men's resurrection protocols, causing the X-Men to become influenced by Mr. Sinister himself. But 10 years into the Sins of Sinister era over at Marvel Comics, Nathaniel has lost track of some of what he's trying to do and now has a team of Sinister-influenced X-Men defying him against all odds. My name is Ariko Braddock, and today, let's go ahead and dig deep into a brand new tie-in over from Sins of Sinister with the Immoral X-Men #1. But before we get deeper into the video, I want to go ahead and encourage you to consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button if you enjoy our content. And I want to go ahead and introduce the creative team behind Immoral X-Men #1. This series is actually taking the place of Immortal X-Men and is a tie-in to Sins of Sinister, dropping the T and becoming Immoral X-Men. I want to read off our creative team. This issue is written by Kieron Gillen. We have art from Paco Medina, inks from Walden, Wong and Victor Olazaba, colors from J. David Ramos and Chris Sotomayor. We have letters from VC's Clayton, Cowles, and design for the issue over from Jay Bowen. Now, I want to show off the cover for the issue, but first, let me read Marvel's solicitation text that they wrote for the installment to get you caught up to speed. Adored and respected, they said the mutants were humanity's future. It's 10 years later and they were proven to be right. The X-Men exist in a world that adores and respects them. So why are they sworn to crush it? But while they do, Emma can take a few minutes out to crush Mr. Sinister. And I want to go ahead and show off this gorgeous cover for Immoral X-Men #1 over from Leinil Francis Yu and Sunny Go. One of the things I love about this particular cover so much is that there's been kind of so much animosity brewing behind the scenes of Immortal X-Men between kind of Nathaniel and Emma that I'm so glad that Emma is finally in a position in the pages of Immoral X-Men where she can, stick some physical violence right back over to Nathaniel Essex because he deserves it for all the scheming he's been doing in the background of countless issues of Immortal X-Men as well as other Marvel titles. Now, I want to talk about some of the artwork in this series from Paco Medina to kind of kick off our review. Very similar to Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants #1 that we covered last week on the channel. I love how Paco Medina depicts these really heady science fiction concepts in such a clear way thanks to his art. Like over on this page is a great example as we're looking at these sort of sinister influenced X-Men conversing with each other. This is already a really heady, high concept scene, but the way that Medina sort of draws these characters with like such precise anatomy and kind of like facial expressions makes this feel like a regular old issue of Immortal X-Men. And in fact, that's one of the points I really want to drive home in our review is I've been having a lot of fun seeing what kind of Kieron Gillen, like all the different ways that he reinterprets the Quiet Council's sort of deliberations in different ways, kind of throughout the pages of Immortal X-Men, where we frequently seen the Quiet Council to kind of come together in order to make a decision. And in this issue, we also get the Quiet Council coming together to make a decision. But the traditional kind of status quo of the Quiet Council is inverted as all of these different characters have sort of been influenced by, Mister Sinister, thanks to Mister Sinister embedding his DNA in the resurrection protocols. That means we get a really kind of interesting, a fascinating sort of characterization between the different X-Men characters, watching Professor Xavier interpret some of the actions that he's trying to doing and feeling a sense of remorse because he is such a good person is such a sort of great character hook, for this narrative idea. And I really think that author Kieron Gillen has used the pages of Immortal X-Men to really set up so many plot beats for this series. I think if any readers kind of read those first couple chapters of Immortal X-Men and were bored by some of, like the politics and all of the ways that Kieron Gillen was sort of shuffling the deck of this new X-Men series, if you look back at like the past couple issues of Immortal X-Men and you just reference how they tie into Judgment Day and Sins of Sinister, it really feels like some of those sort of more monotonous character beats in early issues of those series are actually now coming to the forefront for a great sense of payoff over in this chapter. I was so enthralled with this issue and seeing how, Mister Sinister essentially is very aware of all of the mistakes he's made, causing the Sins of Sinister reality, and watching all those kind of, moments catch up with him and just watching him sort of be so self-aware like he always is so thrilling and interesting to read. Out of all the writers I've ever seen kind of craft a, narrative or perspective of Mister Sinister, Kieron Gillen is among the most compelling writers I have ever seen. Sinister is funny in moments throughout this issue. He's relatable. He's scary. He's as interesting as the event sort of implicates, which is sort of, shocking to say out loud. The X-Men continuity is already kind of so robust in the Krakoa era, and inverting it and sort of adding all these additional layers makes these X-Men series so complicated, but just narratively rich and fascinating. Mister Sinister is full of surprises throughout this issue, and I love how well writer Kieron Gillen is sort of like establishing all of the rules for him. Plus, we get sort of references to future X-Men stories in this as well. I love how sort of each, tie-in to Sins of Sinister has referenced like some other part of Sins of Sinister or some other story. And I'm very happy to see that this issue kind of does the same as well, and also kind of delivers on the premise behind that cover alone. I feel like we go to some really sort of interesting narrative places in this series and really get just so much kind of implications for Emmafrost in particular. The idea of somebody else influencing Emmafrost almost sort of goes against her character. So it's really great to see Emma sort of, break off from her programming, but also reference that it's still there to kind of turn into something really narratively special and interesting throughout the book. Also, the fact that this issue sort of references things that happen to the X-Men during Judgment Day, like with Magneto's current status quo, is just a sort of nice little nugget to connect, the Sins of Sinister era to the previous X-Men issues as well. So it's just so great to see sort of like all of that implemented. Also, one more thing that we should go ahead and talk about is just how great Paco Medina draws all the reaction shots over from Mister Sinister. There's a sequence with him kind of, fighting with a tea bag, or sort of like steeping it in the tea, and watching his sort of like narrative reactions to it. Reading some of his dialogue is really intriguing, but I think this series is really all about that sort of sense of motion that Sinister has as he's sort of talking to himself and really kind of building his own, sense of narrative in the issue before it switches off over to the next character. So I had so much fun with the first chapter of Immoral X-Men, and I love how this series sort of inverts our typical issue of Immortal X-Men to a more horror-themed aesthetic to really show off just how kind of deadly and dangerous Sins of Sinister is. So those were some of my thoughts over on this first chapter of Immoral X-Men, and I want to know from you, did you have as much fun going through this issue as I did? Were you really enthralled by the sort of cat and mouse game between Mister Sinister and Emmafrost throughout this issue? Where do you think Sins of Sinister is headed next? Well, I want to thank you guys so much for checking out the video, and we're going to be back really soon to go ahead and cover everything Sins of Sinister. Thank you so much one last time, and we'll be back really soon for more fantastic X-Men content. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.